Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, David Russell. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com. Soft skills training. Basically, you get to learn the habits of highly successful people for pennies, quite frankly. Learn how to achieve goals, be a great leader, save time in meetings, save time overall, time management skills. There's all kinds of great teachings on Habitly.com. Check it out, 7 days free. Can't go wrong. Today's episode is with Projjal Ghatak, and he is running a company called OnLoop, onloop.com, and they are trying to revolutionize the performance review process so it's more meaningful for managers and their employees. And he talks a lot about entrepreneurship on this podcast. Great for us to rekindle our entrepreneur spirits. Let's dive in. Projjal, it is great to have you on the show. You are the on-fire entrepreneur of the moment. So, I want to talk to you about what made you jump from great success you were having into a startup where you got to fight your way through everything. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, let them know what you're up to, maybe a little bit about your background.
Cool. Thank you for having me, David. And I've been excited about this chat. My name is Projjal Ghatak. I sort of live between Singapore and New York. And for the last 2 years, have been working on my startup OnLoop. Prior to that, I spent a few years at a technology company called Uber that some of you might have heard of. And prior to that, spent some time both in finance as well as in management consulting. I call myself sort of a person who does all things non-technical in tech. Although I have done some coding in the past and might go back to doing it in the future. But sort of I really love being an operator and trying to build technology solutions to solve real problems in the world.
That's awesome. And am I seeing the values of your company up on the wall behind you?
They are, yes.
And do you have that in many rooms in your offices, or is this just yours, or what? Are you in a conference room or what?
Yeah, the room I'm sitting in is the room where this company was founded. And so it is the tiniest room of the 3 rooms that we have in this co-working space. And so the values went up on this wall. We keep switching rooms around as team sizes grow. And so we haven't put them on the other walls. But I do find it extremely refreshing as well as clarifying at times to just sit and read them. It's less about the words, but also the descriptions that we wrote and why we wrote them. And so I do think values are critical for any organization, and we definitely wrote ours quite early on. We had 4 when we started, so it was speed, nurture, delight, and grit. We actually added trust along the way as a 5th core value, and actually the most important core value. And we are currently contemplating changing speed to velocity, because often you can move fast, but not in the right direction. And velocity becomes about speed of direction. So I think values are important, but they can also evolve as a company grows over time and changes.
I thought that was the old story about the guy who and his wife, they're out on a trip, and the wife keeps saying, "Why don't we look at the map?" He says, "No, we'll just go faster. I know we'll get there, even though he's going in the wrong direction. If he just goes faster, he'll be fine."
Yeah, well, actually, my wife works at Meta, and they have a poster which says, "Don't mistake motion for progress." And I think it's very, very true, and something that I tell myself a lot.
Well, I think you're right. I think that would be an interesting change. And it's particularly an interesting change when you consider in a startup mode, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit.
Yes.
You're headed down one path, and then all of a sudden there's new information, and you have to consider changing that direction a bit or substantially. And
Yeah.
so when you talk about that change to velocity, it really seems to resonate.
No, thank you. And I think for us, a very important North Star for us as a company is that right from the beginning, we've been very problem focused versus idea focused. And this might go into a little bit of why OnLoop was born. But OnLoop was born from mine and other founding members' pain from spending many years in large organizations and feeling that the way teams were assessed and developed through sort of old school ways of performance management or L&D left a lot wanting, and created a level of anxiety and bias and time wastage that was frustrating. And for us, our product has evolved pretty significantly in the last 2 years because the world is also evolving with regards to how hybrid teams operate and what the core issues are. But what helps us is to stay super focused on, are we solving the problem we've set out to solve, and not getting too fixated on an idea or a particular feature or something that we've built.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about that because you sound so calm and collected. But when we talked about it before, you're like, this review process is totally, and I won't go into it. But do you want to speak a little bit more deeply about, you had a very successful career going, and then why dive into a startup? I mean, you basically were living the dream. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to go do the startup because I have this passion. And, there's people in the audience who, I guess I would put it this way. I don't mean in an insulting way, but you haven't had the guts to take the risk, which, by the way, the risk may be the wrong decision. So it's not insulting that I say that. Or someone who's taken the risk and gone out and done a startup and it has stalled. And so they've kind of lost the passion and they're not as excited to get up in the morning to show up, or they've got one that's going great guns, but they're having trouble extending that passion to the rest of the team, which speaks a little bit to the values on the wall. I don't know where you want to dive in on that, but just based on what you said, those were some thoughts that came to me.
So I think what I tell people a lot is life is a sample size of one, and you cannot A/B test. And every path is fundamentally unique. And so, I think people can look at my resume or track record and say, quote unquote, I have had a successful career. But my definition of a successful life is one where each person gets the opportunity to unlock whatever their true potential is. And that is often predicated on largely where you're born, and what life throws at you in terms of variables, in terms of what is even achievable or not achievable. Very frankly, it took me 34 years and about 12 years of working to get to a point where I said, I now have some luxury of going and working on something and not making a paycheck for X amount of time. I think that's an extremely privileged place to be. And I think very few people in the world end up with that privilege. And therefore, I think entrepreneurship is also a giant privilege. And that's not lost on me, that is actually not something that everybody actually has access to. I am also very grateful that my career has led me to a profile that is attractive to raising capital. And frankly, I was able to raise capital quite early in this journey that has helped me manage my own anxiety of building a company, and sort of giving myself the space to make some mistakes and not have to live and die by a bootstrap sword. And so, I generally don't like the term, follow your passion. I think we're all dealt a set of cards that dictates what is feasible and not feasible. The way I define a successful life is one where I get to test my limits. And I'm very privileged. I get to do what I get to do every day.
Well, it's interesting what you say, and we'll probably end up where we both agree. But the way you said it, I would beg to differ. So you kind of said we're all dealt a hand of cards, or whatever the analogy you used. And then you said something that I think is very powerful, because you're against pursuing your passion. I would actually suggest that pursuing your passion, whatever hand you're dealt, if you take the approach you just mentioned, can be incredibly wise and is actually consistent with the Lean Startup book that was written many, many years ago. So if you have a passion, test it because that's what you said. You get to test it. If you can test it with a low amount of time, a low amount of cost, and a low amount of other resources, financial, whatever, go ahead and test some things. I moved 100 miles away from where I was for 25 years or so in Novato, California, across the Golden Gate Bridge. And there was a couple there that started by making little cupcakes in their house and selling them, tiny cakes.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many years it took them, but they tested. And then they had a whole business. They had a store, purple van with tiny cakes on it. It was really cool. And I wasn't really into it because I don't eat as much sugar as I do, but I really, thought it was great, we got to do that. So speak to me about that, because whether you were dealt a certain hand and you get to test, you also had a passion to take the leap.
Mm.
And some people, even if they're quote unquote dealt a hand and you have the opportunity to test, they're still like, yeah, I don't think I want to take the risk. And what just like flipped you out to make you do this?
So I think what you said triggered two things for me. One is, I do agree with you. There is a vast group of people that probably has the privilege or the circumstances to take some risk, right? And it may not be a VC-backed software company, right? And there's a vast spectrum of things that you can do there. But if you're a single mother with 3 kids and you have to work 3 jobs to feed the family, I don't think you have room to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there are truly people who do not have the circumstance to create that space. And I want to be mindful and inclusive that those people exist in the world, and that, if they're on the receiving end of this podcast, they're not going to feel like they have the space. I think that's one. I think the second is we underestimate how much courage plays a role in our ability to do things, and how much courage is formulated as a concept from childhood and the reaction you received from your environment for trying new things. And whether you were told, go try and doesn't matter if you fail, or you were told, hey, if you fail, you will get reprimanded. And in a culture like the US, and dare say in more affluent, white families, the culture of experimentation and a culture of courage to try and fail is deeper and deep-rooted, versus in certain Asian cultures where if you mess up, you get reprimanded. And I think that often we don't talk enough about the impact some of those early childhood or life experiences can really have on whether people back themselves to go say, I'm going to go do this, and that I have a decent shot of success, and B, if I fail, I'll be okay. And I'm very happy to be transparent about how gut-wrenching the founder journey is, and how I'm glad I have an amazing therapist now that actually is an amazing personal trainer for the mind and helps me a ton on my journey. But I've never sort of, personally put myself in a position where I can very publicly fail. And that's a very scary feeling for a lot of people. And it takes a level of just resilience and grit to say, that's okay. And to be very honest with you, I'm not sure I'm fully there yet either. And that is very much a learning and growth process, and sort of has its roots in deep childhood that often are not talked about either.
Yeah, and I mean that's a whole 20 podcasts about how we're affected from childhood and trauma. And I had 2 loving parents, but I still came out with wounds. And surprisingly, 2 loving parents, and my biggest wound is I'm not good enough, that I have to fight through. And, you bring up this thing of go out and try it, even if you fail. And I think it is the US culture used to be, I think, more like that. I think it is being more and more fragmented. And I'll share a story which I'm embarrassed to share, but just to be candid for the audience. So my daughter, I have three biological kids, 5 adopted kids. And my biological daughter, when she was probably, I don't know, 4th grade, 5th grade, whatever, she was playing basketball and she wanted to continue to play basketball. And I said, well, why do you want to do that? I mean, you're not tall. You're not going to be able to play in college. Mm. And as Robin Williams would say, I had a severe case of anal cranial inversion. And I'm embarrassed the rest of my life for that comment. Because a year or two later, she stopped playing basketball, but she loved basketball. Mm. And instead, I could have been a cheerleader. I could have been the coach. I could have been working with her to be the best she could be, just to have a good time. And I think that as a culture, and by the way, I want to speak as a culture. I'm talking about you and your neighbors, you and your family as a community, you and your family and friends. You can build out from there. I love what you're saying. We need to encourage people to take small risks where they can't really get hurt except for a little bit of loss of time. But hey, if you want to write a book, write a book. If you want to cook, it's like my 16-year-old daughter is cooking today. And we're like, what's in the oven for so long? Oh, I made fruit roll-ups and they have to cook for a long time. Really? How'd you do that? Well, I got organic strawberries. I have an organic lemon and I had organic something else. I don't even know. Oh, honey. So it's all, grew up. And then she tried to say, well, what do you think? She says, I like it. I want you to buy me more. I need more ingredients. But it was low risk, right? It was like, I don't know, $6. So go for it. So,
yeah, no, on the one hand, I do 100% agree with you. I think on the other is that if you study successful people and you study successful entrepreneurs, what you find often is that there is a negative needing to prove chip on the shoulder that also drives that success.
Yes.
And there is a bit of a sort of tension here. And the best way that I have defined this is what I call being both hardcore plus human. There are people that talk about it from the supportive, challenging spectrum, or they might talk about it from the joy, competitiveness spectrum. For me, hardcore plus human best encapsulates sort of building a culture where there is a strive towards high performance, but there's also room to fail. And if you think about what are the right cauldrons of entrepreneurship success, it really is building a set of circumstances where both can thrive at the same time. And it's much easier said than done because they're fundamentally at odds with each other. But I think that, you need also a drive to be relentless and force through in the face of adversity. And that also comes from various places for various folks. And sort of just the soft landing may not be good enough as a atmosphere to drive entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think you brought it up before with the velocity. You also have to know when it's time to stop. That's been one of my mistakes. But also, I have a question for you because I've run across this. What do you do with the person who you meet who really wants to be an entrepreneur or they've even started something, but when you talk to them based on your experience, this is not going to end well?
I tell them.
Yeah.
And I had a situation actually recently with a founder who's quite early on his journey. And I won't obviously name him or her, but I know his competitors. I know how much his competitors have raised. I know it's a category play in a particular market. And I said, listen, you're going to fail. And unless you find ways to accelerate a capital raising game here, it's just not a good use of your time, and you're wasting talent. And you're a talented person, and you're better off focusing on a problem that you can make a dent in, because it also was a space where I don't think it was his life's work, right? Or something that he felt like deep down passionate about. He saw an opportunity And unfortunately, he didn't move fast enough, and other people did. And for me, I receive feedback from a lot of my friends in business school that, I've also struggled with this tension between being liked versus being the voice that will say what needs to be said, but nobody else has the courage to say. And that I do more service to the world by focusing on the second than on the first. And being liked by everyone is an ideal that I've largely given up on at this point. But I think I'm doing the person a disservice by telling them not what they need to hear. And when someone tells me I want to be a founder, my first response is, don't be. But if you can convince me that you still want to after this conversation, then great. But I think it's a terrible career choice. And it's a terrible way to try to get rich. And it takes a very significant mental health toll that most people probably don't want to take. And unless the cause is worthy enough, or you truly believe you're out to solve a problem in a unique way nobody else is, there is a question of whether it's worth it, right? And whether there is other good uses of time.
I think you brought up three really important things there. I think, first of all, you obviously used a really nice tone of voice when you let him down. Mm. And I think that's really important, to recognize tone of voice, body language, not just say, you're full of blank and you're going to fail blank, turn and run. A second thing is that you brought up to pursue his passion. I mean, if this really isn't, you said pursuing passion is not necessarily a good idea, but in this case, you also identified that, hey, you're kind of doing this following the crowd. And parts of your idea may be good, but you're too far behind in the race. The horse isn't going to catch up. And then the third thing that I really like that you alluded to, that I emphasize that people, when I'm coaching them, I emphasize it on Habitly.com, our soft skills training site, is that, hey, go out and find an opportunity where you can build your strengths even stronger. So You're strong, you're smart, but don't worry about the weakness side. And I'm building a lot into what you said, but go take that strength, find an opportunity where you can make that even stronger. It's a superpower. And then there'll be another idea. That's one thing these people, right? One thing I had to learn the hard way. There's always another idea.
Yes. And actually, my quarter turn on pursue the passion is pursue the problem and pursue the future. Right? Yeah. I think that I'm reading this book called The Founders at the moment. It's probably one of the best books I've read in a while, which chronicles the PayPal story. And it's fascinating. And again, I'm sure some of it is embellished and not 100% true. But I've struggled to put that book down. And it really humanizes folks like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and people who are put up on pedestal as these demigods in tech, and shows that they've been pushed out of companies and have failed miserably, and that there isn't a linear path to success. But the world has a very good way of straightening out a very curved line as they talk about people's careers and people's evolutions. And I think we ourselves straighten out many curved lines when we talk about our own careers and our own steps. And it's very much that pursuit, and being true to that pursuit and what you are pursuing is what matters the most. And as long as you have the resources to support that pursuit and maintain a lifestyle that is healthy enough to create the vessel for that pursuit, we should all be on that pursuit.
Yeah. No, that would be great. And so you and your co-founders basically set out to fix the performance review process, if I'm understanding, or the performance management process. So what type of things irritated you the most? And how did you come about identifying how you were going to solve those? Was that based on personal experience, research, testing different things, or a combination there? How'd you go about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the biggest frustration was this dichotomy of a process that took up so much time, however, led to extremely poor outcomes. So when something takes a ton of time and leads to great outcomes, sure, you might complain about it, but practice makes perfect and you get to great outcomes. So I saw this dichotomy where me and my team spent weeks writing reviews and thinking about the performance management process and what to say and what to write. And that obviously had a ton of anxiety around that whole process. But when I walked into a calibration room and made decisions around who got promoted, who got a raise, it ended up being about who was the loudest voice in the room. And all of this quote unquote data that was collected through the system didn't actually, in a skimmable way, play a role in decision making. And that just felt like a very broken process and one that needed rethinking from scratch. I think what was very also timely for us, I mean, I went full time on the company on 1st April 2020. We incorporated in August 2020. We've only built for a hybrid world, and we haven't built for a world where people were in person. And that also allows us to approach the problem with a fundamentally different lens. In terms of how we went about solving it, it's truly a combination of what I call being inside out and being outside in. And inside out is taking personal experience, and for me that spans both practical and academia. I think I was also lucky enough to spend a couple of years at Stanford Business School, where feedback and building high quality feedback loops is such a strong underpinning of the 2-year program. And that combined with my early years in management consulting, where professional development is very much at the core of sort of talent development, as well as time in fast-moving technology companies, made me feel like I had the right ingredients to go tackle this from an inside-out perspective, but then also ensure that we incorporated work that's been done through research, as well as sort of looking at feedback loops in other sort of areas such as high performance sports or fitness, and taking those learnings to build a product that did that for developing teams. And sort of our vessel became, how do we build a brand new framework approach and sort of scoring mechanism to assess and develop teams in this new hybrid normal, taking inspiration from other spheres where that's been somewhat successfully done before.
If I remember correctly, you said at one point in our conversations that you didn't build this for HR, but you built it for entrepreneurs. So talk to me about how it's being received.
No, absolutely. So, and actually I spoke to a CEO on Friday, and it's very, it's a weird feeling when someone calls your product groundbreaking unprovoked, right? Like it's a strange feeling, and sometimes
but a good one.
Correct. It's uncomfortable, right? So, but I think that, unfortunately or fortunately, the problem of developing teams has been solved through proxy by a functional organization. And this was very much the case in productivity software too, right? So Zoom was born out of Eric Yuan's frustration of WebEx being sold to IT departments that didn't care so much about the end user experience, right? Or Slack was born from the same frustration with HipChat and email, right? So ultimately, we believe that problems only get solved where you solve it doggedly for the person facing the problem. And we believe the person who faces that problem doggedly every day around managing and developing teams is the manager or the leader. And that can be a manager of a 10-person org, or it can be a CEO running a 4,000-person org. Fundamentally, the sort of aspiration of building a high-performing team doesn't differ. And so we think that people, teams, and organizations are a very important stakeholder in what we do, but who we serve is the manager and the team, because that is the core unit where the problem is faced. And we need to solve that problem for that end user above all else, and stay super dogged about solving that problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you and I could talk all day, Projjal. I mean, this is easy, but I think that's the hook. I mean,
Yes.
Let's tell them where they can go and learn more about your company. If they want to get in touch with you, learn more about your entrepreneurial journey and what's going on. Where would they go? How do they learn?
Yeah, so we're lucky that we got to buy OnLoop.com, and so it's easy to find us. It's an easy name as well to Google, and so you can Google OnLoop from anywhere in the world. You'll be the first hit. Rightly or wrongly, I also have a pretty unique name, and so Projjal is also quite easy to find. And I read every LinkedIn message I get, and also my email is projjal@onloop.com, and so. I'd love to hear from anybody who is intrigued or triggered by what we're working on, because we are also constantly in learning mode. And I really value every conversation we have around our approach, as I've very much valued our conversations, David, that we've had around the product we're building, given some of your experiences.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much, Projjal, for being on the show. Really enjoyed, I think, some great insights and reminders for people and inspiration for people.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode with Projjal, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. We'd love to hear from you. Also, don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com. Check it out. Great soft skills to learn there, people skills, the essential skills you need to succeed, not just technical skills. You need to know how to behave your best. Love to have you on here. Stay tuned. We got more great guests coming. Bye for now.